We're going to talk about how to interact with clients. A little bit about me. My name is Matt Curtis. I run a business called Jump to Freelance, and really the goal of what I do is help creatives make the jump to freelance. Creatives specifically because that's my background. I've been doing creative work since around 2002 for clients, and you have to learn this skill eventually if you're going to be in the freelance world. And so there's a lot of stuff I've picked up over the years, some through trial and error, some of this through conversations with others who are further along the road, further down the road than I am or I was when I learned it. But there's a couple things that I have found to be really key, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Just some key thoughts and ideas and strategies, things we can do to prepare to make this conversation not so weird. So this is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about why money feels so personal. I love a real holistic approach to any problem. And so I like having the conversation around why is this hard for us? Why is this complicated? There are some cultural parts to this. And so we're going to dig into that. It's pretty brief, but I think it'll be a helpful setup. We're going to talk about the difference between vendors and partners. This is often a challenge for those who worked on a staff somewhere as an employee, either on a creative team or really whatever you're doing, to then making the jump to now being your own independent thing. We think like vendors. We need to shift to think like partners, or at least have clarity on how we're approaching the conversation. And then we're going to get into how to prepare, the key to effective negotiation, and then a real clear kind of measure as to when it's time to walk away. There are times where it's just not a good fit, and that's super okay. I think sometimes we feel like it's a failure, but it's not actually. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then Q&A at the end. If there are specific things that you'd love insights on, or questions, things that weren't clear along the way, we'll address those as well. So there you go. I'm excited. This is a fun one. This was a fun one for me to prepare. I've gone through it a couple times now, and it's I hope it's really helpful for you. I get really tangible with kind of the behind the scenes a little bit. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is your money does not equal your worth. Now, there's a lot of layers to this, and we're not going to go super philosophical or, whatever on this idea, but I want to bring up this concept for you, because we live in a world where money and worth are very, very tightly connected, but it's not always overt. So if you've done a good job this quarter, you'll get more money. If you're good at your job, you'll get more money. You'll get a promotion. If you move to a better job, you'll get more money. Like, everything about advancement and progress and, in a way, worth, the value you bring to the organization. When we say that, we mean money. You're earning the organization more money than we're paying you. Therefore, you can stay on our staff team. But there's this really kind of implicit connection between money and worth. And the reason I want to call it out is because when we get to the negotiation table, if we are actually defending our worth, our response to the conversation is going to be different than if we're just talking about money. So when a client comes to the table, they're thinking to themselves, I have a problem, and I have a set amount of money that I want to spend towards solving that problem. That's usually where their mind is in this negotiation conversation. For us, at least for me as a creative, full disclosure here, I'm thinking to myself, am I good enough to be at this table? Like, are my skills enough to be? Yeah. And so I attach it to worth. And so we're actually having two different conversations, and we're kind of like passing each other without really knowing what each other's talking about. So they'll say, Matt, this feels like a really expensive proposal. My immediate thought, if money and worth are connected, wow, they don't think I'm good enough. They don't think I deserve to be in this conversation. So I want to encourage you to maybe wrestle with this, but to separate these two things when you're at the negotiation table, because when you're defensive, it puts you in a position that isn't quite as effective, because that's not actually what we read into what the client's talking about when they're questioning money. So I just want to set the stage there. And I want to recognize that this is a big way, this is a big part of how culture positions this. We are connecting those dots often, subtly or implicitly. So for us to be intentional about this is a really valuable starting point to not make money weird, because it's not personal anymore when we're having the conversation. When it's personal, it can start getting weird. So That's the thing I love starting with, just disconnecting these two ideas in our minds. So from here, we have this sense of, okay, we're just talking about how do we solve the problem, right? It's not about, am I good enough? Am I qualified enough? It's none of those things. We're just talking about how to solve the problem. So there are two different ways that most businesses approach solving problems. The first is as a vendor. A vendor is someone who spends time, they do tasks, they sell units, so you go to a place and you say, I would like to buy 5 of these things. That's a vendor type relationship. You're coming to basically just buy the individual product, item, thing. It's usually a tangible good. That's the mindset of a vendor. For many who have served in an organization, like I served on a staff, that mindset tends to be a vendor mindset. A different department comes to me, says, hey, Matt, we need you to make this to promote something, or to talk about this new initiative, or this is something we're doing within the organization. Organizations with internal support often will turn their teams into vendors unless there's a lot of protection around it for creatives. The other side of this is partners. There is no right answer. However, I will say partners tend to be paid a lot better than vendors, because vendors, they're just selling units. Partners, they're delivering results. Partners are solving problems. Partners are providing clarity. So there's a totally different service. You're really serving through outcomes as opposed to tools or equipment or things that can help somebody else do the work. You're coming to the table and saying, I'm going to help you be seen. I'm going to help you be found in your market. I'm going to help you talk in a way that resonates with your audience. So you're serving a much different problem. You're solving a much different problem than a vendor would approach. And so the language matters a lot. The reason that we kind of start here is because the way you talk about what you do sets the expectation with your client. And so when you're at the table talking about money, if you drift into, well, it's going to be an hourly rate of this, and so maybe I can lower that rate, you're shifting into a vendor posture, as opposed to saying the problem is worth this, and so that's why we charge this. So vendors say this deliverable will cost this price. Whereas a partner says, solving this problem is worth this price. So you're really reframing what it is that you're doing. You're really solving problems for them. And that's more valuable. I think about myself. I want somebody to help me solve a problem. I'm less inclined to have somebody sell me a tool that I can then use in the context of me then solving the problem. I like to buy the holistic solution. And so when we're going to the table, having a negotiation, having a conversation, thinking like a partner will typically yield more revenue than thinking like a vendor. There are times where you will be a vendor. Nothing wrong with that. For me, I have a client where I sell them one short video every day on their YouTube channel. That's what I've done for them. Now, the relationship started as a partner. We built a strategy together. I helped, kind of shape the direction that they were going to be moving. But then over time, it shifted into a vendor type of a relationship. So I just want to make that clear. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with selling deliverables that way. But the real key is just knowing what you're going to the negotiation table as. Are you going as a vendor, or are you going as a partner? That's important. From here, now that we have a sense, we kind of recognize the role of money. It's not a worth thing. It's a, how do we solve this problem? It's a mechanism for a business to solve a problem. And then we have a sense of, are we a vendor? Are we a partner? Those types of things. There are some steps that we can take as we're approaching and as we're preparing. And I will say this, improvisation at the negotiation table is both something that you will absolutely do. You cannot prepare for everything, but only improvisation is not a smart way for you to approach the table. The way I like to think of it is, if you don't prepare at all, you're basically committing to gamble in the conversation. So there are plenty of things that we can do to make sure we have a good understanding of what we're coming into the conversation with. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down an offer. So this is a real offer that I have. It's for small businesses. It's called the Audience First Branding Sprint. It's designed to be a very fast process. It's a 1-week process. There's multiple components of it, but I want to show you this offer because it's a great example of the 4 things that you need to do in order to prepare. You need to know your offer structure. So we're going to walk through the structure of it. We're going to know, or you need to know what depends on what. That'll make sense. Basically, it's dependencies. Certain things in your process have to happen for another thing to happen. We'll walk through what that looks like. The cost for each part. This is like top secret stuff. Like, you do not show your client this. This is for your operations internally. And then you need to know your pitch. There are ways that we can practice pieces of this that will help you get more comfortable having the conversation. So that's what we're going to jump into. The first thing here is just an overview of what this offer looks like. So I'm sure you have offers in your business. If you don't, offers are a really helpful way for somebody on the outside to have a very simple and clear understanding of a service that you provide. So in this instance, I do design work and creative work, kind of a wide range of creative work. And so I realized in a process with a client, I can brand quickly. Like, I can actually pull this off really quickly. My systems, my processes, and my experience as a designer has let me get to the point where I can move really fast. So I decided to build an offer around speed. So it's audience discovery, it's brand messaging, it's a custom logo, and a simple brand guide. The whole thing happens in a week, and it's $27.50. The price changes later as I kind of test some of the mechanics of it. But right now, that is the offer. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to understand what goes into my offer. What are the different pieces of it? And so audience discovery, that's really helpful for a client. They need to know who they're trying to market to and who they're trying to speak to. Brand messaging. What's the language that they should be using to reach that group of people? So, see how you're understanding the different components of what this offer is made up of. A custom logo. That's going to help you visually both kind of filter through your business, visually, so everything matches and kind of ties together. But also it establishes you as a reputable, looking organization. And then a brand guide. I have found from the designer side, designing logos is only helpful if you also give instructions as to how that logo should be used and implemented. So those are the different components of the problem that I'm solving as a partner for a business. So we have a sense of this is what the offer looks like. Now we need to understand what requires, like, what depends on what, what elements of this offer actually depend on other things. So this is now a visual hierarchy of 2 different things that have a requirement. So for example, my brand guide, you can call me and say, "Matt, I'd love for you to design a brand guide for me." But really, it's important for me to have designed the logo. I can design a brand guide independently, but what I have found in my own experience as a partner, as a designer for many years, in my logo development process, I actually uncover things that would be really valuable in a brand guide. And so I don't do as good of work just designing brand guides independently. I really should be doing both the custom logo and the brand guide. So in my hierarchy, the brand guide depends on me designing the logo. This is really important for negotiation. So if you're like, "I don't understand why this is valuable," stick with me. The next slide is going to unpack a really powerful part of how we negotiate with this. But I can design you a logo and no brand guide, but I will not design you a brand guide and no logo. So it depends on it. Same is true with brand messaging. I don't really know what your brand should be saying if I don't understand your audience. I need to discover who your audience is, and I need to go through the process that I've built for audience discovery in order for me to help you have effective brand messaging to that audience. Now, if you just want to know who your audience is, I can do that. That is an independent thing that I can do on its own, but I can't do brand messaging on its own. So whatever service you provide, there's going to be some order of operations that you have to go through. And so what you want to do is you want to map those things out. You want to include those things because it's going to help you understand the total cost of these actual items. So here's what this looks like. What I did is I actually built my offer around the cost of each individual element. So I have a sense of the amount of time that it takes me to do discovery, audience discovery. There's also a layer of how valuable this is to a business. I have a sense of how long it takes me to do brand messaging, once I have audience discovery. I know how long it takes me to do a custom logo for this specific project. It would be a faster approach, but I know I can do it because I've done it. I know how much time it takes because I've done it and I've tracked that time. And then I also know how much time it takes for me to do a brand guide, but I know that some of that time is also built into the custom logo time. So what I've done is I've basically said, audience discovery costs me $600. If you want to buy it, it costs you $600. Brand messaging, it only costs $250, but you also have to buy audience discovery first. So you can't buy brand messaging for $250, but I know that that's what it costs. And I'm happy to trim that service off if you don't want it. And so this is where the negotiation becomes no longer gambling, but instead it becomes a very informed conversation. So let's say that Stephanie calls me up and she says, okay, Matt, I want this audience first branding sprint. I think it's pretty great. Like, can you do this for me? I can, but it's going to cost you $2,750. So she says, okay, that's going to be too much money. So can you do it for less money? Not really. I can negotiate on services, but I cannot negotiate on my prices, meaning I can do fewer things for you, which will lower the cost, but I cannot do the same amount of things for you at a lower cost. So this is the key to negotiating in a way that protects your bottom line. What I often see, and full disclosure, I have done this in my own negotiation. You know what? Sure. I mean, I love Novo, and like maybe this will lead to other opportunities. And so sure, I'll shave $500 off the cost and we can just, we can do it. Well, then Stephanie loves the final product and she tells her friends, yeah, so Matt did this logo for me. I think it was something like $2,000 and I got all this stuff. So then her friend comes to me and says, hey, I heard that you do logos for like, I don't know, is it like a little less than $2,000? Like all of a sudden there's this real slippery slope that's happening of my prices being cannibalized with no malice from anyone else, but just because I did someone a favor and did more work for less price. So instead, the way that negotiation should be going is I can do a logo for you for $2,350, but I can remove the brand guide. So what I'm doing now, because I understand the costs that go into this, I'm able to negotiate on services, and I know that my services are attached to price. So now if I charge $2,350, I'm actually not losing money in the sense that I'm doing more work for less money. And that's really what we're trying to protect ourselves from. So the reason this is really powerful when it comes to negotiating is because negotiation, like I mentioned earlier with the connection to worth, it can get really emotional and it can get really complicated for us. We can feel like we're losing out, like, oh man, I need to bring in money. I totally get it. That is a very true tension that I would say every freelancer ever has faced, and many of us regularly face. But to do work in a less valuable way, like to charge less for the same amount of work, is not a pathway to solving the problem. If anything, it's a pathway to keeping you in that position. And so what you want to do is you want to have a clear sense of the different elements of what you provide as a service. And then you want to know what those different costs are, and you want to play around with it. So in the case of I guess, kind of a real life story, I don't want this to just be an academic exercise. So the reason this was really helpful for me, and it actually informed a lot of this presentation, a friend of mine sent me a text. And she said, hey, I have this potential client. They asked me for a rebrand and I just don't have margin right now. Is that something that you do? Do you rebrand small businesses? I was like, yes, I just built an offer. How about that? And so I hop on the call with this person and I have this broken down. And so I say, okay, I know what it's going to cost me in order to pull this off for this client. So in the conversation, probably about 5 minutes in, I realized they actually do not need a rebrand. So they don't need a custom logo and they don't need a brand guide. So if I'm coming to the negotiation table and I'm trying to now argue them into a logo, that's actually not what they need. That's actually not the right solution for their business. And it's going to be a really awkward conversation because now I'm going to have to like manufacture reasons. I'm looking at your logo and I mean, are you sure you don't need a rebrand? Because it's just not where it needs to be. That's a really awkward place to be in a negotiation. If you have to tear a client down in order to try to prop your services up, it's not going to go well for you over the long term, and you probably won't win that client. So because I had this broken down and I had a sense of what the individual costs are for my services, on the fly, I was able to say, I know they don't need $1,500. They don't need the custom logo. I know they don't need $400. They don't need a brand guide. The audience discovery and brand messaging, though, that's a really powerful setup for them. And then I have more of these. This is just a single offer. But another thing that I do is I create like a social media strategy around the audience discovery. So I knew what my costs were for that. And so I actually rebuilt my offer before I even pitched my offer in the conversation in the discovery portion. So as I was learning what the problems of the business was, the one I was interacting with, I was able to just assemble an offer specifically for the type of problem that they were running into. And I knew what all my costs were. I knew what all of the elements were, all the dependencies, all of the things that were really key portions of building this proposal, this offer. And I could do it right there on the conversation. And what was fascinating to me is I was a little nervous about it, right? I'm like, these theories can't work. So I try it and I say, okay, well, so here's what I would propose based on what you're saying. I think audience discovery is going to be very valuable for you. I think you also need to have, clarity on your brand messaging. How is it that you communicate as a brand? I also think it'd be really helpful for you to have a strategy around social media so that you know when to post, how often, what questions to answer, or how to drive your content. So I can create all of that for you, and this is what it will cost. And I'm sitting there on the phone, and I say, so feel free to take your time. And it's a married couple who are also running the business together. So they turn to each other like, what do you think? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that's great. And on the call, they made the decision to move forward. And it was amazing to me because after the conversation, I got some free feedback from them, and they just said, they felt really comfortable. And what this does, when you show a clear understanding of your business, it makes people feel comfortable with the fact that you know how to run a business, you know how to pitch an offer, you know what your offer even is. And I think the missing link for many of us is why the solution you're proposing matters to the business, and you can connect it to the problem they're trying to solve. So because I didn't go in with a stock offer and say, here's my stock offer, take it or leave it, I was able to build something nimbly that actually was a reflection of listening to the problems that they're facing in their business. I have found that this breakdown of an offer has solved my discomfort at the negotiation table. I feel very comfortable being able to plug and unplug different parts of my offer. But it's also made it clear to my customer that I care very much about their problem, which, think about it as a customer, that's what you care about, right? Like if you're going to hire somebody, you want them to care about your problem. And so this helps you do that in a really compelling way. One thing I'll call out real quickly here, this isn't stuff that I show my clients. And so this is top secret, your eyes only is a little header there. This is an internal document for you. This equips you to be able to have this conversation in real time, on the fly, and be informed. Again, where I feel like many times I have gotten into trouble is when I just sort of gut check it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds fine. Sure, we can do it for that amount of money. And I lose sight of the fact that I do actually have costs. Like it takes me a certain amount of time to design a logo. It takes me a certain amount of time to do audience discovery. And for my approach to audience discovery, I use ChatGPT. And so there's a cost to that. Like there are costs throughout every piece of work that we do. And so we need to account for those things in our pricing. And when we get into the gut level conversations, the gut negotiations, it tends to put us in a position where we compromise more than we benefit. So this just gives me the insights that I need to be able to avoid that. And so negotiate on services, not on prices. This is it's a real important part of feeling comfortable at the table because it lets you have plenty of wiggle room. It lets you be able to be flexible and to be open to changing prices, not through prices, but through services. And what I have found is it actually reinforces the value of the project. So if somebody says, take the brand guide off, then I say, okay, So I will remove the brand guide, and that will save you, a couple $100. So, but what that means is that you'll have to kind of figure out how to do this on your own. You'll have to, you won't be able to really share this with the rest of your team in a way that helps them understand how to keep the brand aligned with what we've talked about and all we've invested. And what's fascinating is when clients have asked me that specific question and I tell them the value of the brand guide, they say, oh, well, hold on. Okay, if we're going to be investing this much money, we may as well get everything that helps benefit what it is we're trying to create. So in a lot of ways, approaching it this way has helped me kind of protect the caliber of the original offer, which I've designed to have the maximum benefit. So it's a really interesting kind of opportunity to really hone in on the specific aspects. Abigail, I'm going to check out your question. Let's see. Yeah. Same things for cheaper. That's a great tension. When is it a good time to leap across the other path of negotiating on services? So yeah, I mean, my contention would always be that you want to negotiate on the services themselves because you know which things are dependent on which things. Like that a brand guide's not very strong without building that logo itself. And so whatever is the case in your own business, there reaches a point, and this is really kind of the when to walk away from a project, when you can't solve their problem anymore. So for me, if I'm on a conversation with somebody and we're walking through the offer and they want to erode too many of the core, like the foundational things, then my response to them is, you know what, I'm not going to be able to solve your problem without doing that. And so in the case of the logo, if you say, look, I really just want a brand guide, then I would tell you, you'll be able to find somebody who can get you a brand guide. I'm just not that guy, because for me, I have found that it's critical in my own work to support my clients well and to help solve their problems to the best of my ability. It's really critical for me to have done the logo, to do the brand itself before I do the brand guide. There's just a lot of almost like accidental discoveries that go along the way, as you're creating. And so for me, that's a line that I've drawn. And so I would say, I can ask around, or if you have other designers that you'd want to talk to, I'm sure you could find somebody that can help you accomplish that. For me, that's my line, and it makes it really clear to know when it's time to walk away. If somebody wants to cannibalize the services at such a level in order to lower the cost, then it becomes clear to me, then I'm not actually the one to be able to solve your problem, because what they're going to do is they're going to hamstring you so much that you just can't do a great job for them. And the last thing that you want is to be able to be the one who's expected to solve their problem, produce something amidst all of these weird confines, and then realize, this didn't solve the problem. And then further now have a reputation, with this client to say, yeah, they just didn't solve the problem. The other thing I'll say, and this is a little bit of an encouragement maybe, I have found that my willingness to stand the line actually expresses a massive amount of confidence to my clients that I did not realize. Because when I'm standing the line, I don't feel confident. I feel terrified. I'm like, if Stephanie's going to try to negotiate this, I don't want to lose the client. Like, this is terrifying. But when I say, you know what, my priority is to serve you to the best of my ability and to solve your problem in a way that really actually meaningfully solves the problem that you're facing in your business, I have found that the posture of the client changes dramatically, and they say, that sounds amazing. Yes, that's what we need. And it just helps them begin to see a little bit differently. You're not buying a logo. You're not buying an Illustrator file or a vector file or something you can drop in Canva. You're buying a solution. And so this is why that vendor versus partner conversation comes up in the beginning, to kind of establish our thinking. I'm here to solve your problem. Because a logo is just a file. It's just an Illustrator document or, something you drop in Canva. But it can also be quite a bit more than that. And the quite a bit more than that, that's what I'm selling. I'm not selling, I'm not selling vector files. I'm selling solutions. So that's the shift that really can, and in that conversation, you begin to see if you're not going to be the right person to solve that problem. One other thing I just want to go back to make sure that we touch on, the last phase of preparation is practicing your pitch. And I put a little note here with a human or AI. I think that it's really valuable to have conversations with people. I am very fortunate. My wife is willing to hear my ridiculous schemes and my different proposals and things like that. And so what I'll often do is I'll say, "Hey, so I'm building this offer for this client. This is what I'm going to pitch them. Like, what do you think of the offer? Like, how does it sound?" And I appreciate it because, man, she is direct. She is willing to call out if that doesn't sound right, or wow, that sounds crazy expensive. And what it does is it develops conviction, or it calls out a legitimate problem. If you hear feedback from somebody and you disagree with it, there's nothing wrong with that. You actually want that feedback to make you feel more confident in your position. Or if you hear feedback and somebody says, "That's a terrible offer, I'm not interested at all." Okay, well, that's really good to know before I start pushing this, or running ads, or emailing my list, or contacting businesses, whatever approach you want to take. So getting that feedback is really, really helpful. The other thing I'll say is I have had some conversations with ChatGPT that have surprised me as to how helpful it can be as a thought partner. So the next conversation actually that I'm having in this series of different Novo talks is about how to leverage AI in your business to help you be a better business. And this is one of those little elements. So I'll just sort of like tease it here. But when you use AI as a thought partner for critical feedback, it can actually do a really good job of calling out some blind spots for you, or in some cases, even playing a character to be a resistant client, or, a penny pinching client or something like that. And so you can actually get some really interesting arguments against your proposal, or against the way that, you're presenting things, that will help refine the way that you approach these conversations. So that's another really, really interesting way to approach this. Stephanie just put a link to that. So if you want to RSVP for that now, you can. But there are just a lot of really interesting ways we can use AI. And one of them is to practice your pitch. I have found, and I believe this about every presentation, about every meeting, about every interaction that I've had with people, practicing will only set you up for more success. I remember I was working in an organization it was kind of not really organized, and like they didn't plan ahead. Meetings were actually where you talk about thinking about the thing rather than like proposing ideas. And I remember we hired somebody new, and they came from a very a very well-known and established company. And I remember the first time he walked into a meeting, he said, "All right, here's my presentation." And I remember we all kind of stopped and we're looking around the room like, "Wait, he already has the presentation? I thought the meeting was about talking about thinking about the presentation." And his presentation, it wasn't even that it was amazing, or like it wasn't that the quality of the presentation itself is what stuck with me. It was the preparation. And so I prepared for this talk. I gave it once to a friend of mine. I also presented it, last night before, as I was going through the slides one more time. But every time I go through it, I catch something, I reorder something, and it just makes it a little bit better. As you practice your pitch, as you practice talking about why an audience first branding sprint matters to a small business trying to figure out their way, you're just going to get better at articulating it. And then as you come to the table to have a conversation with a client, they're going to recognize that you feel really comfortable talking about this offer, that you believe in it in a way that, like when I go to McDonald's and order a Big Mac combo, they don't believe in it. They're just like, "Okay, pull around to the first one." Like that's the level of interaction that we have. But if I come to you and I say, I really think that this can help you get past that unknown feeling. You're going to know exactly who you're talking to. When you open up, LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, you're going to have a great question that's a prompt to drive the way that you talk to this group of people that you care about. All of a sudden, a client cares way more deeply about this solution than if I said, "Yeah, if you want to buy my social media package, you can buy it. That's great. I have offer prices on the website. Check it out." So this just helps you get really comfortable, and it helps you get really good at talking about the things that you care about and how they can help you connect the dots. How can this help you in your business for the business leader? So I just want to make sure we hit the practicing portion of that, in addition to just those preparatory steps. So yeah, the big kind of result in all of this is when you can't solve that problem, when the services of your offer get eroded to a level where you can't financially do that. It's just you're asking me to do too much work for too little, and now we can't remove any more services here. like it's time to walk away. And that is absolutely okay. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a business where your reputation is that you help people solve problems, not that you can sell logos, not that you can sell, Word docs, whatever the thing is that you sell. It's not about the deliverable. It's about the result. It's about the problem that you solve. So a couple things, I always love talking about the benefits that Novo provides, and really the ones specific to me and to my business that I've really benefited from. There's two. The first is customizing invoices. And it's actually really, like, conceptually, this fits so well with this topic. When you think about the interaction with a client about money, sending like a Word doc where it's like, hey, here's my invoice, like click on these 4 links to sign up for this account to try, it just gets really cumbersome. I love the simplicity and the clarity that I can get from just customizing my invoice, managing it in Novo, sending it to my client, and there you go. I can set parameters in terms of when it's due and those types of things. That's been really helpful for me after having these conversations and trying to feel really confident at the negotiation table. To then go to a solution that feels polished and smooth is really important. And so this is actually the reason I chose Novo in the very beginning. It's because it gave this, it included this feature as part of what the tool set is. And I knew that was going to be really important for me, and it has proven to be a really good investment and a good decision for me in the way that it handles it. And then the other thing that this has been really helpful, this is helpful for freelancers. And so I'm not giving a money talk, but money is a real, well, I mean, I guess I am giving a money talk sort of, but I'm giving the get money talk, but I'm not giving the now you have money, what do you do with it talk. So you need to make sure that you're putting money away where it needs to be put away. Taxes come, every quarter. I just got an email from my CPA saying, hey, the next quarterly's coming. I'm like, wonderful news. That's exactly what I wanted to read in my inbox today. But the good news is that Novo's reserves automatically put money aside for me. So if I don't have money in that fund, it's my own fault, not Novo's fault or not my bank's management's fault. So the way that Novo does this is super helpful for me. I just set it up with a percentage that automatically pulls every time I send my beautiful invoices. The money comes in and it automatically goes where I need to go. That's helpful for me as a creative, because if you don't know, creatives and money are not like best friends. And so it's been really helpful for me in having a kind of a more stable and established approach to money. So it's a tool that really does, it's actually interesting because I view Novo more as a partner than I do a vendor because it actually helps me solve this problem. So yeah, there you go. Those are the two things about Novo that I always like adding into these conversations. So let's talk Q&A. Any questions that come to mind? These are ways to follow me. Stephanie put links to those in the chat as well. But anything come up that that you find you'd like some clarity on, or didn't make sense, or anything like that, shoot them in the chat and I'll answer them. I also see Elke, I hope. That's if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. But I really appreciate this transition that you're talking about. Oh, here, let me turn off the share. There we go. I really appreciate this conversation, or this moment that you're calling out. I'm pivoting to freelance now after decades of being an employee. I'm negotiating my first agreements. So I just want to call this out because for many, so this was my story. I worked on a church staff for 16 years. So right out of college, I work on a staff. My whole creative career, essentially, I was doing some freelance on the side. But then in 2022, I started on my own thing. And I did not realize how much employment mindset was going to come with me. And so there have been plenty of times where I'm sitting around waiting for somebody to who's gonna find my next client. And I'm like, oh, it's me. Like, everything is on my shoulders. And so this conversation about money is typically something that the average Joe in a company isn't doing. So this is a skill set. It doesn't matter how long you've been in any industry. There's a good chance that you haven't had a lot of meaningful money conversations with this type of a relationship. And so it's definitely one that feels a little bit overwhelming, but I will say it is 100% a skill that you can learn. And I think you have enough business experience behind you, having been somewhere for a period of time, where you'll ramp up really quickly and be able to solve these problems fast, and learn quickly. So, all right, let me read another question here. Okay, so Emma's question, let's see here. I was interested by how accessible your pricing is, and wondering if you position yourself as competing on affordability or perhaps startups. Do you niche down to an industry to add more value in terms of expertise? Great question. So yes, Emma, this specific plan is hyper cheap relative to what I typically charge. So just full disclosure in the nature of feeling comfortable about talking about money with not making it weird. Typically when I'm branding an organization, I'm branding a church. And so my rate usually is around $6,500 for a full rebrand, in part because of the complexity that comes with that. This package, this specific offer is going to sit right around the $4,000 range when it's dialed in. It's at the current price because I'm trying to test it with audiences to see if there is traction, but also to see if the pace at which it's designed to operate can work. So it's built around a 1-week turnaround. So we meet on a Monday, and by Friday, you have all of the deliverables. You have the logo, the brand guide, the whole thing. And so I've built it to be an intentionally kind of reduced product, because part of what I see for small businesses is that they're offered the moon and they're sort of sold the moon, but a small business doesn't need the moon, not yet. And so what I've seen as I work with really large churches is that they have a massive amount of complexity. And then a couple months ago, I flew to Austin and I rebranded 2 churches concurrently in a 5-day period. So that's how I knew I could do it quickly. But I also realized that they didn't need nearly the level of complexity. So it is a reduced offer in terms of price, but it's also a reduced offer in terms of deliverables. So part of what I'm trying to do in my positioning of the offer is to say, small businesses, I get you in a way that maybe you don't know, because you don't actually need what the massive solutions are. And so here's a way that you can accomplish the core critical things that you need at a reduced price that might fit your budget a little bit better. So that was my attempt. You're right. It does put you into a different category, because it puts you into a category that's competing against different options that have a different appearance. And so your pricing and the way you position your offer does absolutely determine if you're a premium or a, cost or a value driven or whatever. So that's another layer of it for sure. So for me, it was a bit of testing the market. So appreciate that question very much. How many active projects are you typically juggling at one time? And what aspects, if any, do you outsource, including to AI? So I don't outsource to anybody at the moment. If I'm going to outsource a project, I'm going to give it entirely. And so for me, I'm a solopreneur. Love the kind of individual solo freelance life. My ideal load is to be working with 4 clients at a time. The way I say it is I have few clients, but I go deep with them. And so there's certain clients I have retainers with. There are other clients where I do kind of ad hoc design work. And then I love having like one big project per month or 2. So think about a major rebrand or something like that. That's a big project that I can go deep with. The purest form of what I do is consulting to help creative teams get healthy. And so that's like if I could do anything, that would be the sweet spot. That's very deep work, very intensive work, and fairly expensive work. And so I can maintain having 1 to 2 of those a month. And that becomes, usually they're usually like 9 to 12 month kind of partnerships. And then the other thing that I've started branching out to, and this is specifically in the jump to freelance space, is coaching. And so I have a group where I do like group coaching, but also one-on-one coaching. And so that's another kind of vein that I'm building. I'm a big believer. Well, whether I'm a believer or not, I guess doesn't matter. I am very diverse in my interests. And so I love the freedom that I have to build a business that lets me be diverse. And so I have, a coaching vein, I have a consulting vein, and then I have, an execution vein. And for me, those are all really important to keep me balanced just as a human. I really love all aspects of those parts. And I find that my design work really informs my coaching informs my deeper consulting work. And so to me, it's all really important to have some of those things going at a time. Okay. And then Abigail, I work in an industry where some designers charge based on what clients can afford. Personally, doesn't sit well with me. Wonder your thoughts on this. Oh boy, this is a really complicated one because there is such a tension. So you mentioned an industry where they can't charge very much. So I'm finding this split as I work with freelancers and as I work with churches. Certain churches can afford nothing. So other churches can afford a lot. But it's a weird tension. So the way I'll just kind of share the way I'm approaching this. I have found that one-on-one coaching is too expensive for church staff, but a group coaching model can work for them. So my approach basically is to say, how do I approach people? How do I approach coaching? Obviously, on a one-on-one basis, it's going to be way more specific. What are the specific challenges you're trying to solve? What are the needs that you have? What I'm in the process of building, I mean, it's launched. It's a constant evolution, but I'm building a group coaching context so that people can get into a coaching environment, but it's not one-on-one. And so I'm trying to like deconstruct what a helpful solution would be. So in the context of design, the ways that you can do that is you can design something and then sell it to multiple clients. You can focus on setting a minimum that you feel is appropriate. So the tension ultimately is that your compassion for a group of people can't put you out of business. Like it's a really complex conversation to have in the sense that we feel like we want to give as much as we can, but I really have appreciated advice that I've gotten over the years where they say, Matt, you can help nobody if you're not in business. And so sometimes we look at the how do I help everybody, and it puts us to a position where we essentially can't make enough money to survive. So instead, I would say, trust that there's a group of people that you can serve, and then trust that there's another person who can come in and help another group that maybe is beyond the group that you can serve. And so I've tried to structure my own solutions to be, I have paid solutions that pay my bills. And then I have some cheaper solutions that are a little bit more accessible, but they're not going to get all of my time. And then I have free solutions for people that can't even, either aren't interested in spending any money or can't spend any money. So I try to tier my solutions based on the needs that I see, but I have to be realistic in the sense that if I can't provide for my family, then I'm going to have to find a job. And that means that I'm not going to be able to help anybody through the business that I run. So it's a little bit of that, pragmatism of saying, okay, we have to solve the bills problem. Like we have to make enough money. Maybe you can work for a high dollar client and then take on one of these other clients, one a month as a volunteer thing or as a charitable mindset kind of a thing. Nothing wrong with that. It's your business. You can do what you want. And so, like I'm posting a thing on LinkedIn later today about barbecue and how that relates to business somehow. Like, I mean, maybe I'm burning my business down in real time, who knows, but I have the power to do that. That's the freedom that I get in my own business. And so I would say be sensitive to your own financial needs, the needs that you have in order to be successful in your business and maintain just a life and to be able to meet your needs. So that to me is kind of the threshold. What that's meant for me is that I don't do charitable design work. In the church world, that's limited me to some of the larger churches, which I would love to work with smaller churches, but I have to get the revenue engine dialed in first before that can open up. And so that's where I look at my coaching as like, look, I may not be able to help you by doing one-on-one consulting, but I can have you join this group and you can learn a ton of practices to apply in your own, in your own space. So that's kind of how I navigate that. Yeah. Follow me for barbecue tips on social media, on LinkedIn. Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie, for shouting that out. That's good. Yeah. And Abigail, it's a really interesting, it's an interesting problem to face. And I think there's more layers to it than even kind of what I'm sharing. But I do know that if you're out of business, you won't be able to help anybody. So that is a very kind of foundational piece, but I love that question. And I love the complexity of it. I don't know if that's maybe a future topic. It might be too niche, but yeah, I love that. Great question. All right. Anything else? If not, I expect likes and comments on my barbecue, on my barbecue post.
Yes. Yolanda added, likes offering group opportunities. It's a great way to segment your market too. We're doing a lot of things that can easily be done with a group that we do one-on-one.
Yeah. That's a great insight. And that's very much kind of my mindset too. Another thing I'll say, I'm not really a big like funnels guy. There are a lot of people who love the, get somebody with a lead magnet and then you'll turn them into $1 million client, that kind of thing. I struggle with that pathway just personally. It feels a little bit more manipulative than I feel comfortable with, But I will say, I view each of these places along, well, I'll use the funnel language just for simplicity, but along my funnel, I want to build trust with you and I want to build benefit that you receive as we go down it. So if you download a tool from me, I want that tool to be something that actually solves the problem that you're trying to face. It's not a trick to get you part of my ecosystem. It's a way to solve a problem in a way that doesn't cost me money. I've already created the tool, have it for free, and I hope that solves your problem. If that does, then I hope that that builds trust so that if you consider joining my coaching group, you would say, I kind of trust that this guy will have more advice or insights that will be helpful for me because that tool did that. And then if you're in my group and you say, we have a really actually an acute problem in our business, or I have an acute problem as I'm trying to build my business, maybe this guy would be a good guy to talk to. Like, so I'm trying to build trust with every rung, but I'm also trying to provide legitimate benefit. The gap here is just how can I separate my time from the delivery of that benefit? And so free resources, create them once, they're there forever. Literally no involvement from me once I've created it. Secondary tier, I'm investing my time, but it's a limited amount of time and it's with a group, not one-on-one. Awesome, great solution. And then one-on-one starts getting more expensive. And then like long-term deep problems gets more expensive. And so that's a great insight, Yolanda. We are already doing things in our business that other people would benefit from having access to in some way, shape, or form. Not to say you need to give your design files to everybody for free, none of that. But maybe if somebody comes to you and says, I can only pay you $100 for this design, then you say, I've designed these 5 things for another client. I will sell you any of these for $100. Maybe that's a way to solve it. But that's really where the negotiation happens. You can't just spend all your time giving freebies. You have to also generate revenue.